Alright, welcome guys. Today we're gonna check out the interview by Chris Wilson of Arthur Bruno, aka Medierra, on the forums, right? He is more or less the head of Crate, one of the original founders of Crate, and one of the people who originally also worked on Titan Quest 1 in the past. And yeah, I hope this is gonna give us some pretty interesting insight to ARPG development in general, to Grim Dawn Fangs of Astakarn, maybe even Grim Dawn 2. And yeah, I honestly am just interested in listening to this interview myself, and I thought why not listen to this together with you guys, and yeah, that way get your opinions on the matter as well. And also to more or less I don't know if Chris Wilson needs more publicity or Arthur Bruno needs more publicity, probably not. But I just wanna give these guys a little bit more exposure as well, to be fair. So yeah, let's head right into it. And if the sound is too quiet or too loud or anything like that, let me know.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. Today I'm going to be chatting with Arthur Bruno, the founder of Crate Entertainment and the creator of the action RPG Grim Dawn. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because Arthur took an entirely different approach to most aspects of the business model of his game and the structure of his studio than we did back when I co-founded Grinding Gear Games. Thanks for joining me, Arthur. To many of our viewers, you won't need an introduction, but some people aren't familiar with the creators of their favorite games. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. It's always great talking with you. I'm Arthur Bruno. I'm the founder and creative director of Crate Entertainment. I've been in the game industry for about 25 years now. I kind of got into it by accident at a time when, there weren't any colleges or anything for game development. And I just started playing Age of Empires at school and became one of the top players. And then Ensemble asked me to do some work for them and said, hey, you should apply for a design position, which, was wild because it didn't even occur to me that you could have a job working in games.
That's very cool.
So yeah, I did a little playtesting work on Age of Kings, and then one of the co-founders of Ensemble asked me to join his startup studio, Iron Lore, which was working on an ARPG that eventually evolved into Titan Quest. So I was just one of the first guys working in a windowless one-room basement office in Sudbury, Massachusetts, trying to get a publishing deal for Titan Quest, and then basically helped hire up the design team. Saw that game through to completion, worked on the Immortal Throne expansion, and then I founded my own company in, I guess it was 2009. So it's been a while now, Crate Entertainment.
Which studio did you say was the one before Iron Lore? Ensemble Studios? What did they even make? When I know Iron Lore...
Crate, I was able to work out a deal to use the Iron Lore engine since, the Titan Quest engine, since Iron Lore had gone out of business at that point. It was a wild idea because, I didn't really have any investors or anything. I was just paying for everything out of pocket. But, I thought that, hey, there's no other action RPGs coming to market, and, Titan Quest sold over 1 million copies. So, if I could do something rough and small scope and capture even 10% of that audience, it could be a stepping stone to something else. And then, Path of Exile caught us by surprise. Torchlight appeared out of nowhere. And then later on in development, Diablo 3 was announced. So, I was really scrambling, trying to figure out how am I going to be competitive in this market. So I launched a Kickstarter, was able to hire up some guys who'd come out of 38 Studios at the time. We got it to early access in 2012, and then just kept...
The YouTube peasants cannot hear the interview. They cannot.
Putting all of the money back into the development
of
the game until we finally launched in 2016. And, and it's funny because I originally thought, man, if we could sell 500K copies, that would be amazing. And since then, we've gone on to sell 10 times that number. And it's put us in this position where now, we kind of have the freedom and flexibility to just kind of do what we want, work on projects that interest us, and, take whatever time we need to, make the product meet our expectations.
That's a very cool story, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. Let's start with Titan Quest. I remember this game fondly. As my viewers know, I played a lot of Diablo 2 back in the day, but that segued into a lot of Titan Quest. One of the reasons Path of Exile exists is that after Titan Quest, there were no other action RPGs being made. Like exactly the same feeling you felt when you started on Grim Dawn is basically there was just the silence, and it felt like there was an opportunity in the market. And so this was off the back of an awful lot of Titan Quest play between me and my friends. Jonathan in particular, I remember we basically lived in the same room playing Titan Quest for a number of weeks there.
That's awesome. It's cool to hear.
So on Titan Quest, you mentioned some of your responsibilities, but can you go into more detail about what your role was and what you worked on in that game?
Yeah. Brian Sullivan, who was one of the co-founders of Ironlore, had heard about my work helping with multiplayer playtesting on Age of Kings, and got in contact with me, and I eventually went down, and they made me an offer. But this was before they had a contract, publisher funding to develop the game. So I was kind of working on like an hourly basis. I was driving like an hour into the office a couple of days a week, and had no idea if this was going to go anywhere. And I think kind of like the sunk cost fallacy kept me going, because it took 3 years to get a contract. So the more time I put in, I'm like, man, I gotta see this through. Gotta make it to the end. We gotta make this publishing deal happen. And during that time, I had have played Diablo 1. I actually did not play a lot of Diablo 2 because I was swept up in RTS fever. And then later got into MMOs. But, obviously they wanted to make an ARPG, so I'm like, I got to learn everything I can about ARPG.
Grindel microphone. Yeah. I mean, he was apparently like more or less like an Age of Empires, like, I don't want to say like pro gamer, but he was like really good at the game. And that's why he was...
And I started playing Diablo 2, and, I became addicted to it. I played, just thousands of hours of Diablo 2. And with like me and one of the other guys, an engine programmer who went on to found Unknown Worlds, would just be up until like 4 a.m. Or sometimes we wouldn't even go to sleep. We just played Diablo 2 all night, sleep in our chairs, and then wake up and start working on, Titan Quest again. And during that time, I just applied a lot of the lessons that I had learned as a player for what worked and what I thought could be improved in Diablo 2 to the design of Titan Quest. And I was given like pretty much free reign to just design an ARPG. So I was there just working on the design for like 3 years until we finally got a contract and were able to hire up the rest of the design team. So I worked on pretty much every part of the game, designed, I think, almost all the major features. And then was just, led the gameplay team and, implementing everything, fleshing out the game, doing all of the itemization, setting up all the monsters and the boss battles. I did a fair bit of like level development and then help, plan the Immortal Throne expansion. And while that was being worked on, I was tasked with trying to create and pitch other projects, but none of those really came to fruition.
Well, you did an amazing job with Titan Quest, and thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yes. So, as you mentioned, this led on to Grim Dawn when you licensed the Titan Quest technology. What were your goals with Grim Dawn? Like, what did you set out trying to achieve there?
So, honestly, I felt a little frustrated working on Titan Quest because, there were certain aspects of the game that I thought could be a lot better. Some of it was that when you're working for a publisher, you sign up for, a milestone list of what you're going to deliver. And to change anything on that milestone list is very difficult during development because, you have to it's like, say you have an idea for like a great new feature or whatever. You don't necessarily have time in the schedule to work on that. So now you have to cut something. But to cut something, you have to go meet with your project managers and convince the publisher that it's, worth making this change. And so typically that just doesn't happen. There were a couple of times when I wanted to do things and, management was like, well, it's just, too much of a hassle. Like we have these deliverables. This is on the schedule. There's just, no realistic way to get this done.
Right. Whereas on your own projects, you can just do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nobody here to tell me I can't add a feature, which, sometimes is a bad thing, but I think generally works out for the players.
I wonder how many features they implemented in things about the current that delayed the game by, well, I don't know how long now, honestly. Like,
and then on top of that, I feel like really this kind of misguided attempt from the top to make this very like family friendly. And so we weren't allowed to have blood and gore or even really like hit effects. And I don't know that the game necessarily needs to be gory, although, you know, I think a lot of the audience enjoys that. And I do myself. But without that, without any kind of hit effects, you don't have very good feedback or like a, you know, satisfying feel to combat. And we did get a lot of criticism about that after launch, where I think somebody likened combat to like cutting wheat or something, because there was no like meaty impact. You know, there were not a lot of like flashy. That's
true. I mean, Grim Dawn is not necessarily the perfect game, obviously, when it comes to that, but it's compared to Titan Quest, you have way better hit feedback, in my opinion. Like, Titan Quest does feel like, well, it's not as bad as Lassie Pocket necessarily with like wet noodle sound, but it is
feedback when you killed or hit an enemy. There were no death effects or anything like that. So it was a lot of, you know, I think stuff like that. A lot of things that I learned over the course of Titan Quest development that I didn't get to apply because systems had already been created, and to go back and redo them would have just been too painful during development. We didn't have time to do that. So when it came to Grim Dawn, I was just, you know, it was like a chance to do everything all over again, but the way that, you know, I wanted it to be.
That's really cool.
A little self-indulgent, but
yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you wanted to change the game a lot. I mean, Grim Dawn certainly has changed compared to Titan Quest, but I don't know if it changed like a lot, right? Like, but then again, if you consider that he already was the actual like game designer, or like one of the big game designers of Titan Quest 1, I guess in many ways Titan Quest was already like a game he wanted to make, and then Grim Dawn became like the actual game he wanted to make, more or less, right? Is Chris an actual Grim Dawn enjoyer? I mean, he certainly was a Titan Quest enjoyer from what I heard. Maybe he's also a Grim Dawn enjoyer. Maybe he's gonna...
You know, I never noticed the combat feel that you're talking about in Titan Quest until you mention it now. And then thinking back, I do agree. Like, as a, you know, decades later as a game developer, obviously it's, you know, the effects that you're talking about do make it more punchy. But as a player at the time, I was so focused on items.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's difficult as a designer, is that oftentimes there are ways in which the game is not best meeting, you know, the player's needs, or it's not providing the level of satisfaction it could, but players don't necessarily know why. And you have to try to interpret that or figure out what that is. Like, for example, there was a time during development where people kept complaining to me that Titan Quest felt slow. The combat felt slow. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, like, man, you know, like, it's timed out pretty, you know, comparatively to like Diablo 2, and like I was very hesitant to increase the speed because as I'm sure you know, when you're working with like itemization and skills where they have a lot of like speed bonuses, you know, you have to plan for an end game where things can become ridiculously fast. So you can't.
I mean, yeah, to be fair, like Titan Quest had like a way, like, I don't know, I don't want to say better, but certainly a stronger character development when it comes to like character speed between like level 1 and like max level and items, right? Like Grim Dawn is rather conservative in that regard, way more conservative than Titan Quest 1. Titan Quest is played on 2x speed now, but like when he was creating Titan Quest and Immortal Throne, right, back then there was no speed option. The speed option came later with the remaster, right? Like with the whatever it's even called for Titan Quest, but like when the new team took over, they implemented the 2x speed. But back then, it didn't exist. So, like, back then, you only had 1x speed. And then, yeah, I mean, Titan Quest is certainly a slow game. But to be fair, I feel like Diablo 2, also early game, is, at least if you're not playing a sorcerer, it's rather slow, too.
Have your base level be too fast. And I was really resistant to changing it. And I got a lot of, like, pressure from the president to, you know, make these changes. And but I really wanted to think about it. And eventually, after analyzing it for a long time, I realized that there was like a discrepancy between when the hit visually looked like it was happening in the animation and when the sounds were playing. And when we fixed that, because a part of it is like the human brain, like you can kind of unconsciously perceive that something's wrong, but you don't know exactly what it is. It just feels bad.
Honestly, like that's how it sometimes feels like in Last Epoch, for example. Like some things just don't feel that crunchy and like fitting well together, right? Whereas in Grim Dawn, I feel like there aren't. I mean, sure, like the engine is dated, the graphics are like terrible by modern standards. Well, I think for the engine it still looks beautiful, but like, yeah, the engine is like 20 years old. But nothing really like feels wrong. I think like they have kind of nailed it in Grim Dawn when it comes to the way like animations and sounds and all of that stuff like works together. Some stuff in Grim Dawn is weird too, really. Aether slams do 0 damage. But like the sound and the animation of an Aether slam, they work well together, don't they? Or what do you mean exactly? Hit feedback is huge, yeah, 100%, 100%. And then like also on top of that, you have like the ragdolling and gore stuff in Grim Dawn. I don't know, like compared to that, like for example, Last Epoch, even though it has a much more modern engine and like generally you would say better graphics, it's just bleak in that regard. The curses feel bad in Grim Dawn, like Haunt. I don't know about I don't know. You always look for the icon. Like, you think it, like, fades in too late. Never get the feeling that you're casting it.
And part of it was that it just felt bad to people. And they were saying like it felt slow. And then it turned out once we fixed this and synced everything up, everybody's like, oh, wow, this feels, great. Did you make the game faster? It's like, no, we just fixed the hit calls.
That's really interesting. It reinforces the thing that Mark Rosewater, one of the designers of Magic the Gathering, has said, which is that, listen to the player's feedback, it's important, but don't necessarily listen to the solutions. Listen to the problems and find an appropriate solution. In this case, fixing the sound timing was a good solution rather than just speeding it up to mask the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think always you have to listen to the feedback because it's, if players are complaining about something, then something's wrong. But oftentimes it takes some detective work and really looking at the numbers to figure out what exactly it is. I mean, we had another thing in development on Titan Quest where people were play testing one of the new skill masteries. And I don't know, I think it was like Volcanic Orb or something. It was like one of the Earth Mastery skills. They were saying like, oh, the skill just seems really weak. It seems very underpowered. And I was busy and I didn't get around to making changes, but the effects artist had checked in new effects for it, sound effects and visual effects. And the next, couple days later, they're playtesting it and they're like, oh, wow, this skill feels like great now. I think it might even be overpowered.
Thanks for the raid, Tamakar, and thanks so much for the resub, Cyborg69. Welcome in, guys. Hello. Is it worth getting the game without DLCs? Grim Dawn, you mean? I mean, it is worth to check it out, I would say. But to get the full experience, you definitely should get all the DLCs eventually. I mean, but yeah, it's fine to like get the base game first and like play through maybe like the first couple acts and like see whether or not you like the game at all. And then if you do, make sure to get the expansions. They are juiced. They are very, very good. Also, Tyler, thanks for the 12 months. Welcome back. Season tomorrow, yeah. Hopefully this year, guys. That's all I can say at this point.
And then I had made no change. And then the best part is literally a day after that, the engineer who was working on the skills came to me and said, oh, by the way, I just found out that Volcanic Orb is totally broken. It's never done any damage. So it went from underpowered to overpowered based on visual effects, and the skill wasn't actually doing any damage.
Yep. We had similar things with Path of Exile where, players would have opinions about the balance of certain things, and later you find out, oh, it's never worked. That thing has never, ever done the increase that it says. It's just been at 0% the whole time. And we were convinced, like, we were making changes going, it feels a lot better now. The player's like, yeah, good job. And, the thing never functioned.
How does it
I think that I may be wrong about this, but my memory is that, like, bow damage increases in classic Diablo 2 didn't work or something like that, for quite a while after release. And, it's just really hard to tell. I mean, nowadays, of course, we've got unit testing and more mature ways of developing stuff where it's a bit less cowboy, but it's interesting how the game can still feel great.
Wait, nowadays they have unit testing? They did all of this without unit testing back in the day? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, talking about the start of Grim Dawn, I vividly remember your Kickstarter crowdfunding in April of 2012, because we launched our Path of Exile crowdfunding in the same month, though not on Kickstarter. We decided to use our own site because I wanted to save the 5%. Your campaign did incredibly well. We were watching it and super, super pleased to see that I believe it raised over $500,000 that month. So what did the success unlock, and what constraints did the crowdfunding create for the project?
I mean, the big success is that I went from a guy who was paying for a little bit of art and volunteer work out of my pocket to all of a sudden I could actually hire some, full-time employees. And that really accelerated development because we'd really kind of like one of the main guys that who had been doing volunteer work on it had a kid and had a new job, and things really slowed down. And I'd reached a point where I was thinking like, geez, is this ever going to happen?
Thanks for the sub to Siraj Tyler. He hired people. I mean, wasn't he like a one-man company basically at the very start, or like he and like was like 3 people or something like that?
Like I need to do something, otherwise
like who else is gonna
this game's never going to go out, and how many years of my life can I devote to working on this without pay? So we did the Kickstarter, and all of a sudden a couple of people came on, and I got super lucky. I didn't realize this at the time. I mean, I've always known that they're great guys, and I enjoyed working with them. They do good work. But I don't think I really appreciated how amazing some of the initial people that I hired were, until like later on. And, we had to go through the struggle of trying to grow the company, and found that it was very hard to find, other people out there who were, met the kind of caliber of people that I just kind of lucked out with early on in my first hires. But, that greatly accelerated the pace of development. But it also put me in this position where I had this doomsday spreadsheet of, how many months is it until I run out of money and I can't pay people.
Actually, Zanta wasn't like probably one of the first people he hired. I don't know if he even hired Zanta himself. Like I think Zanta like joined like 3 years later, like in 2012, right? Like he founded this company in 2009 already. And if you think about it, right, like the company has been founded in 2009. Grim Dawn released in 2016? That was like 7 years of development.
And, all of that pressure of not only providing for people's livelihoods, but the fact that I had just taken these people's money in all the Kickstarter donations, and now I had to deliver a product that I, wasn't fully sure how I was going to get from point A to point B with that. I remember waking up at nights, like shortly after the Kickstarter, in like a cold sweat, thinking, oh my God, how am I gonna finish this game? Like, how am I gonna, put a product out that these people donated for? And in my head, I had imagined at some point maybe we would have to sign on with a publisher, but like if we could get the game far enough completed, it would at least give us some leverage to make a good deal. And I did talk to some publishers at one point as we were, that my doomsday spreadsheet was counting down. But I just always felt like if we had accepted one of those deals, we would end up in a similar position that we were in at Ironlore, where you're kind of like on a treadmill towards a cliff that you're going to fall off of when, if you can't line up the next project fast enough before, your initial funding runs out.
And what do publishers give you? Like, what do they provide you with? They provide you with exposure, I guess, and money, right? So, I don't know. Nowadays, you can just pay, like, I don't know, influencers for exposure, or streamers. I mean, most of them are probably much cheaper than whatever a publisher would do. I mean, okay, like, professional marketing is something publishers probably still can do better, but I feel like if you know the right people, the right influencers, not maybe just people like myself who don't actually know that much, then it should be not that hard. No, like it should be a lot easier nowadays to do marketing as a small company without the need of a publisher, I feel like. But yeah, money is of course another aspect.
Out. And also we wouldn't have ownership over the IP, which, I think would make things very restrictive in terms of what we're able to do. And I mean, that just the whole like management structure you need for reporting when dealing with, investors or a publisher. At one point, I even explored this crazy deal with a mining company.
What?
where one of the guys is actually based in Australia, but I guess he was a huge Titan Quest fan. And I guess he was saying that, investment in mining is sort of similar to the type of investment that we would need in games, because they apparently they spend a lot of money just doing exploration to see even if there are resources that are mineable before you can actually create a product and bring it to market. But yeah, that didn't quite work out. And so, eventually, I just kind of kept going, but Steam Early Access became a thing. And, once I knew that we could get the game out in Steam Early Access, that took a lot of pressure off, because I was like, all right, we can release something. Because I felt like we had a really good bit of content, and I felt like the game felt very good at that point. It just needed a lot more content.
Yeah, now I want to have a Grim Dawn style delve as well, like a delve mining endgame, something like that, where you go down into some Astakarn mines or something like that. That would have been like so fun.
So I think it was either 2012 or 2013 we did the Steam Early Access, and it didn't blow up big or anything initially, but it provided enough income that we could just keep development going, and have the time that we need to eventually make the product we were finally able to make.
That's true. Master Sword, although streaming is pretty good for advertising games, I wonder how much of the gaming population watches streamers. Anyone I mentioned streaming in Twitch too kind of looked confused about it and dismissed it as trendy Gen Z / alpha stuff. I mean, I'm Gen Y, and I would say that many people in Gen Y also know at least like YouTube, like Let's Players and streamers and Twitch on YouTube as well. But for all the boomers out there, right? No offense. Grim Dawn or like Crate, right? They do like lots of marketing on Facebook still, right? It's kind of crazy. Like Xanta even said this also like the last time, right? When he was on stream here a couple months ago, that they still do have a lot of success like marketing Fangs of Astakarn and something like Father's Frontier, or even like potential Grim Dawn 2 on Facebook, right? But yeah, it depends on the target audience, right? You will probably have like way less, success marketing a Fortnite style game, or I don't know, like a Roblox style game to people on Facebook than say on, well, unless they're like parents of kids, right? Maybe, I don't know. Who knows?
How many staff did you have working on it at that stage?
I mean, immediately after the Kickstarter, I think I might have had like 3 or 4 people, not including myself. And then by the time that we released Grim Dawn, we were up to 7 people, I think.
God, it's amazing you made such a good game with such a small team. I mean,
yeah, it's actually funny because I feel like people don't really believe that from the outside, or think that we worked like crazy crunch, which, I mean, I did in those initial years, but like, now we're still a very small studio, but like we don't crunch or anything really. And it was always very awkward when I was initially hiring people, and they're like, well, how big is, your team? It's like, oh, it's 7 people. But we made Grim Dawn, and I think people like can't quite do that math in their head of like, how does that make sense?
I had a similar experience where when we released Path of Exile, we were shopping around to find a publisher for Southeast Asian regions like Taiwan and so on. Eventually, we signed with Garino, who we were happy with, but we talked to another publisher as part of, courting different ones. And they were very clear with their rejection of us. I vividly remember them saying, okay, look, we like the game. We think it's going to do great, but we're not going to publish it because your team is 22 people. And we feel that to run live operations for this, you need another 100 people. And we said, oh, okay, what would they do? That 100 people that we're just going to hire? And they go, oh, no, there's so much stuff to do. And on one hand, they were completely wrong. We published the game just fine with our 22 people. But on the other hand, they're right, because GGG in its current form has grown to hundreds and hundreds of people, and they are all doing useful things. And it enables the very large-scale live service stuff that I think that publisher was expecting the game to grow to. So it was prescient for them to say that, but at the time we thought that's crazy to just incur, $8 million a year of extra costs for no benefit.
Yeah.
And so, but man, getting your game made with, a team of 7 people or less is very impressive. I understand how difficult that would be.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just, I think, the fact that we're all remote and we don't have any kind of there's no extraneous people. There's no like management layer really. There's no bureaucracy. We don't really have meetings. We're not
the corpo
spending time on things that don't make sense because a publisher wants us to put out a demo or this or that, whatever. So I don't know. Things are just we're just very streamlined. Like we don't have any just pure concept artists in the company. Because I don't know, early on, I didn't have money for it. But I also just came to the conclusion, like, well, there's lots of good character artists out there who also can concept. So why not just hire people like that and then, make a concept? And I think it works out especially well because a lot of times, like if you look at big AAA studios, the type of concept art that they're often churning out is like way overdeveloped.
Yeah. It's good for marketing and for, art books and that kind of stuff, but it's more detailed than the sculptors or low poly people actually need.
Yeah, so a lot of times we just are like, hey, do like a line drawing to start out, do a bunch of line drawings, and we'll pick one that we like and then develop it maybe a little bit further. But, still we try to keep things like as rough and fast as possible just to, because it's all just an intermediary product.
I wonder if there's an incentive where artists would really prefer to work on high detail things because it makes great portfolio pieces and they can be super proud of these amazing illustrations they've done.
Yeah, well, I think there's that. And I think also, people who are concept artists get into it because they love drawing. And it would be like if you asked a, 3D modeler, like, oh, just half finish the model. We don't need the full model. Don't bother wasting too much time texturing it.
Yeah, we just want the front.
Yeah, just do the low poly and just put some primary colors on it. That would be very unsatisfying. So I understand how things get pushed in that sort of overdeveloped direction. But yeah, the problem is it's an intermediary product that other than a few samples potentially making it into an art book, nobody's ever really going to see.
Yeah, I guess it's useful to have a few super high resolution pieces for your, It
would be so cool to have like a Grim Dawn art book, right? Like a hardcover or something like that, where they print all their like concept arts they had in the past. It would be kind of cool to see.
Booth somewhere at Gamescom, but aside from that, you don't actually need the detail for, actually creating the assets.
Yeah, and you can always hire out for that, for like marketing art, or like honestly, most of our marketing art is just done in-house. Like, we have a couple of guys who are 3D modelers, but they also are just, very good 2D artists. And, are they the, best 2D marketing artists available? No, probably not. But like, it just doesn't need to be.
Yeah. Somewhere on the internet, there are a lot of artists super angry at us now, but,
Yeah, probably.
The reality is, I suspect that for AAA games, ones that really want to push the fine fidelity, then they will benefit from the super high quality concept art. But, for us, especially with a top-down perspective, we have different goals with the way we develop our art, especially cost cutting.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. Is for an isometric game, or especially a very zoomed out game like a Town Builder, it's like, the level of detail is not viewable from, typical camera angles. So spending too much time developing that in 2D just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I understand. So you mentioned that Crate is an entirely remote development studio, and this is fascinating to me because I didn't really enjoy COVID. Like, Grinding Gear Games was very much set up to be a crowd around a monitor and make a game with your friends in person kind of setup. And that was a lot of fun. And running a studio remotely where you don't actually get to interact with people face to face was really hard for me. And so I've seen the amazing success you've had just, doing it remotely. And I'm sure this comes with many advantages, like, being able to hire people all over the world or whatever.
One would wish, right? One would wish, but they're only hiring from the US. Like, initially they didn't even want to do all the hassle with like different states within the US, right? They were all like from Massachusetts and so on, right? I believe initially, or like New England region, and then eventually they also hired some people from like other parts of the US, but they're still not hiring from outside of the US. I wish, but yeah, I guess it makes sense because they are on the fuck bureaucracy train, and hiring from outside the US would mean like a lot more bureaucracy, and it's like kind of only worth it once you have like more than one guy from outside of the US like working for your company, and like just for one guy, it's probably not worth it. Yeah, exactly. Blender. Exactly. I mean, they have like more than 10 employees now. I think like maybe even around like 20 almost. Like it's almost, well, it's not big, but compared to their initial size, it is a little bigger than before at least. I don't know how many they are actually right now in this very moment. They might even be like, yeah, like above 20 now actually. Because I don't think like all are, I mean, obviously not all are working on like things of Astakarn. They also have like Farthest Frontier. They have like people that were working on the Grim Dawn 2/RTS engine. They're making a new RTS game right now. They're making like the one horror game that I believe Grava was working on since it feels like 10 years now already, almost. And I think it was even like another side project that like Xantai was working on, but I think that one got, that one got cancelled. Maybe it was like a Grim Dawn card game. Who the fuck knows? No, I don't know. I don't.
Can you talk about why you set up the studio like that, and how much of a difference it made when COVID hit, and because you already potentially had your remote workflows all set up completely at that point?
Yeah, the why is very easy. It was lack of money. Early on, like we were so bare bones just that poor. I just couldn't. I actually went around and looked at some commercial property at one point, but like I just couldn't pull the trigger on signing a lease because it was, it seemed like so much money relative to the fixed amount that we had at that point after the Kickstarter. And then, we were in early access for a number of years, and, we didn't have like a lot of extra money even then. So there was always this dream of, man, someday we're gonna release this game and we'll make some money and we'll finally be able to open an awesome office. And then that day eventually came, and we were like, well, where should the office be? And I remember spending a bunch of time like looking around at a map for an area that seemed like it'd be cool to have an office, but was kind of like centrally located based on where people had ended up in Massachusetts over the years. And it was like a lot of people were going to have a 30-45 minute drive, and I myself am thinking like, God, I just I'm a little bit of a recluse, so I'm like, I just can't imagine having to actually put on pants and get in a car and commute to an office every day.
No pants development, let's go.
And it was kind of, I think, a relief for everybody when, I finally said, hey, look, I don't think we're going to open an office. Like things just are working really great the way that they are now. And nobody, seems excited about having an office. And I think it's provided a lot of benefits. I mean, obviously a big one would be that COVID had no effect on us, really. Other than my kids were home all the time. But, for the most part, like we just kept working as we always had. But beyond that, there's a lot of other, benefits in terms of like lifestyle.
What is their official like address even for their, like, do they have like a remote post box or something? Is it just like their official like company address, or is it like Arthur Bruno's home address is like the company's address, or
and I think that they benefit the company too, because it's, I think, impossible to have a human being come in and sit at a desk for like, really in the game industry, it's going to end up being like 9 or 10 hours a day a lot of the time. Even if it's not mandated, it's like people are just they want to finish their work. They're passionate about the thing they're working on. But like just sitting in an office continually is, it burns you out. And then oftentimes it's just inconvenient. Like I honestly, having worked remote for so long, I don't understand how regular, like people who work at a regular, like, physical company get anything done, because, half the time during the day I have to go run errands, or my wife needs me to pick up the kids a certain day. And I'm thinking like, how did two people who, work in a physical office place, like find time to get all this stuff done? But meanwhile, at a remote company, it's like people can go out and mow the lawn or work in their garden or run an errand during the day. It's no big deal. And then they come back and they just put in the extra hours at night. And I think that for the most part, people probably end up working more hours because it's so easy to sit down at your computer and chip away at something, as opposed to like having all of your stuff on a PC at work where you would have to drive into the office if you wanted, put in an extra hour after dinner or something like that.
My wife needs you to pick up the kids. It's such an American thing to say. Yeah. Like, imagine your kids not being able to walk on their own or like just take the public transport on their own. Like, as a EU citizen, I just cannot fathom how like your kids are unable to get to school and home or like to sports or gym or whatever on their own. Like, how they like once kids in Europe are like 6 or 7, like why the fuck would you need to pick them up anywhere, right?
How do you handle communication with like documentation and stuff? Like, are you a documentation heavy company? Do you have like an open Discord call going all the time so people can hear what's going on? Like, how do you disseminate information?
No, I am famously anti-documentation. I'm pretty bad at it, even when we probably could use some more in certain cases. But like I remember when I was working on Titan Quest, they told me, well, one of your jobs as the lead gameplay designer is you need to put together a design document. I'm like, what? Why do we have to have this big design document? Like I'll just write a technical specification, I hand it to the engineers, and we're good. But no. I think the publisher expected to see one. So I ended up spending, I don't know, like weeks, maybe a month putting together this huge, like 60-page design document. And then nobody ever read it after that, which is exactly what I imagined was going to happen.
Because
I mean, Zentai's documentation, not gonna lie, like, okay, no offense. I mean, it's most of the time good, but sometimes, like, like how... I feel like when Zentai writes patch notes, some of them have like worse documentation than when I myself like write patch notes for the League patches, right? Like community League patches. Like oh well.
Is out of date the second someone has a conversation after.
Other than that.
Yeah, basically. That, or it's like people they don't want to read through some giant, overly verbose document. They just want to be handed the piece of information that they need. So we keep things like very loose and streamlined at Crate. I also try to hire people who I think understand the types of games that we build. Like, especially with an engineer, if like, an engineer has experience working on strategy games or an ARPG or an RTS, whatever, they have kind of an understanding of like how things should function in a game. So you don't have to spell it out in infinite detail. You can, be like, hey, make the UI work like it does in this game. And like, they know what you're talking about.
Just make it work.
Or the unit control or, whatever it is. They kind of have a sense for how it should feel. And you may have to, play test it and, have some back and forth, but you don't have to like create this extremely detailed technical specification of how something should work. And a lot of times, like we mainly just use Discord for communication. So like,
I feel like Chris is like getting flabbergasted every time like Arthur says like anything about like how, well, you could say like sloppy their like work ethic is in some ways, and he's like, how the fuck does it even work? Like, how the fuck did they even make the game?
I say I have this new feature I want to add to Farthest Frontier. I might, depending on how complicated it is, do an actual like write up in a document. Like of this is, how basically it should work and hand it to the engineer and then we'll talk about it. Or sometimes if it's like something that's more simple, I'll just be like, hey, it would be cool if this happened in the game. And they'll be like, okay, okay, what about this? How exactly do you want that to work? Or what should happen in this case? And we'll just kind of chat about it a little bit. And they'll say, all right, I'll give it a shot. They'll check it in and say, hey, I checked this thing in, take a look at it. And then I'll say, hey, this is awesome. Or this is almost awesome, but it'd be, if you could like fix this part, or it'd be really cool if it actually did this. And actually, I think that whole back and forth is a huge part of what helps us make games that I think are have a little bit more like character than what you get out of some of the bigger studios. Because, going back to like Iron Lore, where you have to sign up for a milestone list of what you're going to do, there's not a lot of room for like organic ideas to emerge. Whereas for us, where I have kind of like oftentimes a high level idea of what I want the game to be. And based on what genre it is, I know that there's like a certain list of features that players are going to expect in the game that we'll need to tackle at some point. But a lot of the time, it's like I am just constantly working with people to implement ideas, and then playtesting the game. Like I playtest the games all the time. And because I'm playtesting it
imagine doing unit tests when you can just playtest yourself, your own game, right? That's, well, I mean, I don't know about time efficient, but yeah. I'm in the south and there's areas that to this day still do not have sidewalks, thus the law prevents kids from being able to walk to school, basically. Yikes. Dude, that's like walking should be a human right, you know? Like how can you prevent people from walking? Like how is that even possible? I don't know, man. Did they use Skype at the time? I believe he said like they started using Discord basically like as soon as Discord was a thing. But then again, like back in 2009, that wasn't really a thing yet. So maybe they were like using. I mean, yeah, what was like big in 2009 was like Skype and TeamSpeak, I guess, right? Maybe they were like TeamSpeak developers, who knows?
Seeing these ideas as they come online, it just naturally leads to other ideas.
Video sharing.
That I don't think that you necessarily have when you have to plan out everything in advance on paper.
I see. I guess it helps in this case because it's a relatively small team and you're a very focused game director. It means that a lot of the communication can happen in your head to some extent. Like if you're holding the vision of it, you can individually work with people on features, but they don't need to necessarily work with each other on features in a way that would require more formal specifications and stuff, because it can come through you, or at least you can mediate that stuff.
Yeah. And I think, there are limitations to that and there are downsides. Obviously, if we were a much bigger company, things wouldn't be able to necessarily work like that.
That's very interesting. I could talk about this structure stuff all day. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was to do with the multiplayer way that you've structured, or the multiplayer or lack thereof in the initial version of Grim Dawn. So, like Titan Quest, it's primarily a single-player game that has optional co-op play. And compared to online-only games, obviously this brings benefits for players, like not having lag or disconnects and being able to play with there's no internet connection like on a plane. What were the biggest impacts of this decision from your point of view?
I mean, it's really hard to know, because we only have this, we only have what we did. It's hard to compare it to what we didn't do and what might have happened had we done things differently. I mean, it's like this thing, the whole thing with marketing, where you put a bunch of money into marketing, but you don't really know how much of an impact something would have had if, you had done this or that. You can't A/B test it in a different reality.
And to be fair, if Crate had like any marketing at all, I mean, they do have like some marketing, they're gonna say, but like compared to other companies, right? If they had like any marketing at all, maybe I would have actually like already like known about Grim Dawn also like way earlier than. I mean, I ended up playing buying Grim Dawn in like late 2016, when it was already like out for like half a year. I've like never ever had I had never heard about the game before that, basically, until I like randomly searched like Diablo 3 like games in Steam or something like that. I think I literally like found Grim Dawn like via the Steam store, because it was like being recommended to me by, I don't know what metric exactly, but yeah, I don't know.
But that said, I mean, we did have a lot of people show up early on in the development of Grim Dawn and say, hey, this game's going to be dead on arrival. It doesn't have secure multiplayer. Why are you even wasting your time making this? And obviously those people were not correct. We went on to do very well for ourselves. And I think a lot of times, and I was one of these people early in the days, like when I was playing Age of Empires competitively, I never played the campaign or anything. And I just thought, me and all of my friends who play Age of Empires, who coincidentally were all people I met while playing PvP online, that's all we do is we play PvP online. So that must be what everybody does. Because my sample size is only these people I met playing, PvP. And then as I started working with the developers, they really disillusioned me of that by, releasing the stat that something like, I think it was 15% of people ever logged onto the Microsoft Gaming Zone to play online. And I was just like blown away. I couldn't believe it.
I heard a similar number for Diablo 2, where 100% of people I talk to say they played on the secure servers, but yet when you hear the stats, it's like you say, the vast minority of people played on the secure servers, and the average consumer purchased the game, put the CD in their drive, played it, and had a great time, and never went online.
Yeah. I mean, that, or, a funny thing that I really thought about back in the day a lot when I was playing tons of Diablo 2 is that for a long time...
Maybe EHG should have like also listened to those numbers. I don't know.
Like me and my buddy we would play on the secure servers just with each other. And there were times where we were always playing on hardcore mode, and there were some times where really devastating things happened because we hit a lag spike and a character died. And at some point I just realized, like, why are we playing on the secure server? Like, there's no benefit to us. I mean, we're buddies who are playing in the same office. Like, we're not cheating, and we're not playing with any other people. So why not just play on an open battle.net? And I think that's like the reality for a lot of the audience. However, on the flip side, there is a perceptual thing where even if you're not competing in like leagues or whatever, if there's no ranking system, you do want to have this feeling that there is this kind of integrity to what you're playing, that you're playing in the official version, exactly. And that what you're accomplishing there has a certain level of integrity, because
like this only like matters, like playing on secure servers, stuff like that, only matters for people that are either competitive or that want to like feel that they are truly achieving something in the game that has some like actual value and meaning, or like integrity, as he says. But I feel like the majority of people, especially like the more, like non-super hardcore competitive gamers, right? They play games to relax after work, or like they play games to just have fun and enjoy themselves because they're still 12, and they don't care about competitiveness all that much yet. And as he said, like the competitive like percentage of people that are playing games is a vast minority, not a majority. They're just very vocal because they are like playing those games, like they're playing a lot. So like by hour, I guess the amount of people that are like playing games per hour, like there's a lot more like competitive people in that metric, in my opinion. But that most of the time, except for maybe a game like Path of Exile or like games that like sell MTX and so on, and have like kind of like whales carrying their games, where you have a few people like funding the entire game development basically. Except for those kind of games, like if you do like Grim Dawn style like financing model, right, then you don't necessarily care all too much how much your people play the game. You only care whether or not the people buy the game in the first place, and then like enjoy like a 1 or 2 time playthrough to then like recommend the game to other people. And like that way you just make like more, you make more money if you have this model, right? So it really doesn't matter all too much to cater to like a super competitive like a player base, apart from maybe like some games like RTS games, or also like MOBA games really lived off like the competitive environment, right? Like StarCraft, for example, like became as huge as it was just because of like the competitive leagues and the fame from South Korea, for example, right? Without that, I think StarCraft, or especially like StarCraft 2, would have not been as successful as it was, right?
Because the rules are enforced, and you couldn't have cheated. Other people that you're playing with, that they're not cheating. And so even if you're not really participating in like any kind of ranked play, or you're not playing with random people on the internet, I think that it does have an appeal to players. And then on top of that, I think even for people who aren't really playing online, it's hard to ever quantify how much of an impact does that very vocal hardcore multiplayer audience have on generating additional word of mouth sales and hype game for the more casual audience. So like that's something that I'm sure has impacted Grim Dawn to some degree, but it's hard to really know what that degree was. And the reality is I didn't make a decision to have, an open multiplayer mode that was made on Titan Quest. Right. And I actually voted against it. And our publisher, THQ, was adamant that it was a waste of time to create, secure multiplayer. Because they just, according to their data, was such a small portion of the audience. I don't know. They just projected that they didn't think it was worth the investment.
Yeah. One thing I do have to say though, like you can't easily give a game like more competitive, a little bit of a competitive touch to it, right? By introducing something like the leaderboards, or honestly even like something that we did like with the community seasons, right? Like having leaderboards there. I mean, the game itself is still like the same, like, like buy to play, cheat however much you want, unless you're playing in the leagues kind of style. For example, like Mega Bonk, right? Like Mega Bonk, like this Vampire Survivor style or like Risk of Rain style game, did one thing that like the other games didn't, and that's like, well, official leaderboards like across the world, I guess. And that kind of like does give people like a small incentive to still be like a little bit more competitive, and thus like appeal a little bit more to like those competitive people, while the game itself is still basically like, like offline only, or like whatever, you can like play it whenever you want and so on, right? I don't know. Leaderboards don't work if you don't have secure online servers. Yeah, that's true. But that's also why I think like probably just like in Diablo 2, right? Like you don't need like secure servers for every player, right? You just need it for like a specific player percentage, and that could be like a nice way to like cut or like keep down some costs as well, right? Like you have an offline mode and an
when I started
Grim
Dawn, I had inherited the Titan Quest code base, and being a couple man operation originally, like we didn't have the resources or the time to rewrite the entire re-architect the engine to be authoritative. So that it wasn't really a decision that we made, and I might have made it differently otherwise, but at least at that time. And part of it is just because, that's what appeals to me as a player. I don't know that it makes sense from a business perspective. I just, it's just something I think is cool and be cool to have. But, nonetheless, like it's totally feasible to be successful, of course, without that. Just, depends how you budget things and who your target audience is.
Yeah, maybe the best approach, if there's enough resources for it, might be a hybrid thing where you both have secure online play for those who want it, but you also have an offline version for those who prefer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a totally, fair way to do it.
There are certainly advantages to the secure online play in terms of, it's prevents piracy. It makes, as you were saying, it verifies the fact that people have actually accomplished what they say they're accomplishing. It feels really real. But then, for many people, single player also feels real. They don't realize it shouldn't feel real. Why should I suddenly think about cheating? I'm just playing by myself or with my friends, kind of thing. So I think that there are certainly advantages to both, and games could be, with the right resources, architected in a way that supports both. The business model pending. And the reason why I find Grim Dawn fascinating here is because, as you say, circumstantially, you were forced into a situation where you didn't have secure online play, but then you did incredibly well despite that. You provided such a good game experience for so many people, sold so many copies. And do you think this might be because most of the other action RPGs were trying to do secure online play, so they had the always online stigma and the issues associated with that, lag and desync and, like microtransactions and so on?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say that I feel that we necessarily pulled a lot of audience from other ARPGs who were dissatisfied with them. I mean, clearly there's some degree of that. Like you do hear people were grumbling online about, connectivity issues with various like ARPGs, and I'm just a single player person. Why should I be forced, to play online? But, and ultimately I think that it's more that it's just a big genre. Like there's a huge player base. And one of the things that I think is very hard for more hardcore players to understand, and this is me back in the day, is that the average person doesn't play a game very long. like you have these people who are, and it's funny because we get these like negative reviews periodically on Grim Dawn from people who've played like thousands of hours. And then we'll say something like, wow, this game was fun for a long time, but eventually I ran out of things to do. And it's like, yeah, like the game is not meant to keep you occupied for the rest of your life. But some people, like, they have that mentality. They don't want to start a new ARPG or whatever it is if they don't think that they can put like 10,000 hours into it.
10,000 hours for $50 is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it's a very good deal. But the vast majority of the audience, like, they're going to play the game for 10 to 50 hours, and they're going to have their fun, and then they're going to move on and do something else. And I think that, that's a big part of where, like, Grim Dawn has seen success is because people, the vast majority of the audience is not, like, tied to a specific ARPG. They may play them all at one point or another. But then after that, they may only continue, they may move on to different games, or they may just continue playing the one that they really resonates with them. And I look at it a bit like, the book industry. There's thousands of books come out every year. And part of the reason that there's a market for thousands of books is because people read them for a limited amount of time. And people have different, specific, ideas of what makes the perfect book or the perfect game for them. And the fact that we're a small company and we don't need to have, 50% of the market to be successful means that we can make a game that more specifically caters towards a subsection of the overall audience. Because really the ARPG audience is not monolith. It's made up of like a bunch of different groups who all want sometimes mutually, conflicting things in the game. So being like more single player oriented and being like oriented towards a more, I think, slightly more hardcore single player audience, has allowed us to carve out a niche where, we're able to, I think, more directly cater to that segment of the market than, like a Diablo, which is trying to be everything to everybody. And ultimately, they have to make some compromises. Things get watered down a little bit for one group or another.
Yeah, watered down.
There's a topic related to this that I wanted to discuss, which is the concept of not having to worry about an online economy when you're balancing the game. And I don't just mean, it's nice to have less work to do because I don't need to balance an economy. But a big issue I faced when balancing Path of Exile is that if there's a single way to play that is most rewarding, it starts to affect everyone in the game, even if they don't want to play that particular play style themselves. Yeah. Because if other players who are playing the flavor of the month build or whatever are getting more rewards per hour played, then those players become relatively richer. And the prices for desirable items can be bid up by them. And so items become out of reach for players who aren't using the optimal strategies. And so we had to try really hard to make sure that there are many roughly equivalently powerful builds available. Whereas I imagine if you're balancing for single player and you make something overpowered, they're not harmed by the fact it exists in the game. They can play it or not. How did you find?
Dude, like him bringing up this topic makes me like so glad Grim Dawn doesn't have this shit. like honestly, I feel like don't like many people like play games to also like escape like real world economics. Like why the fuck do you have like real world like flipping market economics in a game? Like I mean I know like some people think that's fun, but I mean yes you can just ignore trade and just play SSF. Yes you can do that. I guess that's fine too to a certain degree. But then I guess in PoE2 it at least doesn't feel as bad. Maybe. And you would definitely like try to, or like you would need to disconnect yourself from like any kind of comparing yourself to any other player. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like even the existence sometimes like still affects you a little bit. I mean, I also try to not have it affect me as much as, or like in any way or form whenever I play like PoE2, for example. But sometimes you do feel like, like you could, or like at least you have like always like one guy in chat like saying, yeah, you could like play this and that build, right? Like, and I'm like, okay, like what do I need for that? Yeah, you need this and that item. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can't play that because it's like trade only basically, right? And Grim Dawn does make it a little bit easier with like being balanced around single player with the drops and so on, whereas PoE is, well, definitely like more balanced around like this whole economy like existing in the first place. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, yes, you're right. You can just play SSF and like ignore it, but I feel like it still affects you in a way that just makes you, if you don't want to be affected by that, have generally, like, at least in this regard, a little bit more fun playing a game that doesn't have this kind of economy stuff at all in the first place.
I think that the concept is similar. It's just the consequence is less severe. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I had not thought about that one group, participating in like online, bidding for items can drive up the cost and make it inaccessible for others. That's certainly a much more...
Wait, he didn't even think about that? Like, come on.
more severe consequence of this problem. But below that, there's the issue that players will, more... And then when I say competitive, I don't necessarily mean people who are like competitive with other players, but that they play the game in a more competitive manner. It's funny.
But yeah, I mean, I totally understand it, because it's like so far away from his bubble. Because like, I mean, he was also a competitive like Age of Empires player, right? You could say. But like Age of Empires RTS kind of competitive like gaming is also like still so far disconnected from like this PoE trade economy stuff. Like it really... You would not think about that ever. Like, if you haven't played those kind of games ever, you're like, what the fuck is he even talking about? Like, I do get it.
Because like whenever I play Diablo 2 back in the day, it's like I'm going through the game as trying to be as efficient as possible, to keep moving forward, to level up as fast as possible. And the reality is like, there's no timer. I'm not competing against anybody. It doesn't really matter, but that's just my mindset. It's how I play games. And so, I'm the type of player who's always looking for an advantage or an increase in efficiency. And I think a lot of people are driven by that. And the danger is when you...
Didn't he like contradict himself a little bit here? Like he said, like he doesn't care about that, but like in the next sentence he says like he cares about efficiency.
Have mechanics or aspects of the game that you feel that you must participate in to have the best advantage, but which are detrimental to your fun. And like an example of that, this is probably a controversial one for many players, because I know some people are going to have, totally different thoughts on this. But I found that when I was playing Diablo 2, at some point after hundreds of hours of playing, I was just starting to lose my interest. Well, hundreds, more like thousands of hours. But it was after I'd played like a lot of Diablo 2. I felt like the magic of the game had diminished for me somehow. I just didn't feel as connected to the game. I wasn't as immersed in it. And I thought, well, maybe the time has finally come. Maybe I have played too much Diablo 2. It's time to move on. But I realized that part of it is that I always had the minimap overlay open. And it had gotten to the point where I was not even looking at what was going on the screen. Like, I was just playing the minimap overlay.
This is why Grim Dawn doesn't have a minimap overlay. This right here.
And I think it really diminished the game experience for me. And it's part of the reason why on Grim Dawn,
but honestly, I agree.
When you open the larger map, it kind of obscures your view. We never made a transparent overlay.
It removes,
some people complained about it. But it's the type of thing where I feel like to some degree you're almost saving some players from themselves, because if you can just look at an overlay where you're basically almost playing Pac-Man, look at line drawings, some people will do that because it's the most efficient way to play. And I think it's a similar thing with like builds and itemization. Even if like, I think it's easy to think like, if it's single player only, then you don't have to really, worry as much about balancing. And
I wonder if Arthur has more hours played in Diablo 2 or in Grim Dawn, though. I kind of wonder. I mean, he said he did like lots of play testing instead of like unit testing, right? Like instead of writing unit tests, he just play tested himself. So
like maybe it's true to a degree. It's just because again, it's not as consequential. But I still think it's very important that you can't allow certain things to become wildly overpowered. Otherwise, certain people feel like there's an established meta and only these builds are really good and they're wasting their time if they play something else. So I don't think it's quite as critical, but I do feel like, always there is this desire to have, variety at the highest levels of play. The one thing I think is probably beneficial for being in a more offline and, single player environment is that when you do make balancing changes to stuff, it doesn't hurt quite as much for people.
They can play the old version or whatever if they don't like that change, or
not necessarily that they could play the old version. I mean, they always could because we do have modding tools. But it's more that it's not disrupting some kind of competitive play, right. Direct competitive play in a ranking system or anything like that.
I mean, Madly would disagree, right? Madly on the toxic top 20 enjoyers would disagree, but hey.
Yeah. So you haven't swapped someone's shoes in the middle of a marathon here.
Yeah, that and just like being not being like a free-to-play game, we don't have to have like quite as intense of a grind or quite like plan for as much kind of like long-term gameplay. We can make it easier for people to access like the highest level items, which isn't to say that it's easy. I mean, you still have to put in a lot of hours farming stuff potentially, but like I don't think it's quite to the degree of how long it takes to really max out a character in a game like Path of Exile.
You mentioned modding, and obviously an online-only game like Path of Exile can't really support player-made modding tools because there's one authoritative version of the game running on the developer's servers. But Diablo 2's offline mode had a huge modding scene, even though it wasn't officially supported, and my understanding is Grim Dawn does as well. What are the costs and benefits of offering official modding tools to the community?
I mean, obviously you have to create these tools.
Let's be real. The cost is almost zero because they themselves are using the same non-optimal tools, right?
I think that a lot of times people don't understand how bad some of the tools are that we use.
They are fucking terrible. Some of them, I don't know why they didn't start by writing better tools, but then again, them not caring too much about the unit testing and just being yeah, if it works, we can just work with it and make something work, right? I guess that kind of explains why some of their tools are as well barren as they are.
Development, and oftentimes there's kind of an arcane knowledge required to use these development tools. But when you want to make them accessible to people for modding, you have to do a bunch of cleanup and try to make things a little bit more intuitive. And
bruh, they were even messier before.
And, develop the UI a little bit better. So there's a little bit of cost there. Although I think that cost has ended up, benefiting us in the long run because now...
I was gonna say, you guys are using it yourselves, right? Why wouldn't you make it so that it's somewhat comfortable at least to use for yourself in the first place?
We get to use those tools. And as we've gone on to make, a number of expansion packs, it's made development for, internally a little bit easier. I would say that, one of the biggest issues, though, is whenever you're releasing, a patch or an expansion, there is the potential to break people's mods. And then oftentimes you even will end up with various bug reports that are, a result of conflict with mods, but players don't realize it. And it can waste a lot of time trying to dig down and figure out what exactly is happening. And then you discover, this person's running. It could even be a very innocuous mod. A lot of the mods people make are just, tools for the game for inventory management, or they want to change the itemization, the color tags for items, stuff like that. But on the flip side, and again, it's a difficult thing to measure, but I think it, has provided some increased longevity for the game as we had, some people made this amazing Diablo 2 mod, basically recreated Diablo 2 and Grim Dawn, which was really cool. Or there's a group that basically runs a PvP league, and they created a mod to facilitate that. Which is funny because even though
I mean, I don't know if I would call it PvP, but yeah.
We don't have a secure architecture. These people kind of like will sort of self-regulate it by, observing, the games and whatnot, the PvP outcomes, and determining whether, it was fair or not.
Wait, is he talking about the flippant tournaments we did like 5 years ago? What is he even on about?
That's cool. Have any mods?
Or is he like mixing it up a little? Like, I feel like he's mixing up like our community leagues that have like player leaderboards, which is technically like indirect PvP because you are like competing against each other for like PvE points, right? And also we did have like PvP tournaments where but that was like years ago. We did like 3 of them only. But they did like them a lot, and they did like implement the winners of those PvP tournaments in the game after all, so they are aware. But I feel like he's like mixing those two up a little bit, which is a little
the development of the core game and its expansions.
Yes, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember at one point that there were mods for certain things that were sort of like quality of life mods, and that at one point I think I remember us thinking like, this is really cool. A lot of players are enjoying this. Like, we should just make it an official part of the game.
Yoink.
Did you ever see a noticeable increase in sales of the base game when a big community made mod came out that was popular?
No, I wouldn't say so. And I mean, it's probably hard to track because I think that, first, it's mainly just people who already own the game end up playing the mod. I think that if there was an effect on sales, it would probably be more so that it kept people playing the game longer, and then therefore increase the attach rate for DLC.
Yeah, I see.
Expansions and whatnot.
Yeah, and of course, more people playing is more word of mouth, which means more incidental sales and slightly more numbers on Steam.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the type of thing though where it happened over such a long period of time that it doesn't create like a noticeable spike or anything.
Yeah, I see. For Path of Exile, we found that a 3 to 4 month release cadence was best to keep players constantly engaged while giving them enough time to build their characters and play enough of each league. For a live service game that relied on ongoing player retention to make money, this was of utmost importance to us. I did a GDC talk a few years ago about this exact topic of trying to work out the right cadence, and that was a big deal for our business model. What did you find worked for your expansions? Did you intentionally have a specific cadence you were trying to hit?
No, we didn't. So I don't know. Honestly, I can't tell you what the best cadence would be. I mean, certainly, I do think that it makes sense to try to keep updates happening on a regular basis. I think that it would have been beneficial if we could have put out more DLC.
To be fair, I don't think you can even compare this. Like a live business service model needs to have a cadence. I don't think necessarily like a game with like DLCs needs to have a cadence like that, really. I mean, you could argue that a certain timing for DLC after a launch is ideal, right? To keep players interested and stuff like that. But the best cadence is in the soldier mastery in the game. Yeah, exactly. That's all the cadence they need.
Closer together. But I mean, the reality is like we're a small development team. At some point, it's been like after the release of Grim Dawn, I had no idea what to expect for the sales of the game. Back in the retail era, you'd get some big spike at launch, and then your sales would dwindle pretty quickly once you lost your shelf placement. And nowadays, obviously, that's totally different with digital storefronts. But, as my first digital game release, I had no idea what to expect from it. And so we planned things with the expectation that sales could just drop off at any time. And so we started another project. In fact, got it rolling a little bit before the release of Grim Dawn. Just had a couple engineers plugging away on what would become Farthest Frontier.
Right.
And then because we had to, move some development resources onto that, it, diminish the rate at which we could potentially put out expansions for Grim Dawn once we saw that, hey, this thing's actually selling really well, and we probably.
Wait, didn't they decide that Grim Dawn isn't gonna have more DLCs before having Farthest Frontier in early access even? I mean, yes, they did start developing Farthest Frontier, like, I think, already during Forgotten Gods or something like that. But I don't think Farthest Frontier was, like, out in there and selling when they more or less, like, said Forgotten Gods is gonna be the last expansion. I mean, yeah, that's true. They did say something like maybe if they're, I mean, they did say something like according to their statistics, like it wouldn't make any, or like it wouldn't make like too much financial sense to make another DLC for Grim Dawn at that point. I guess their analysis at that point was just wrong, or they didn't, well, like predict that Grim Dawn is gonna do so well even like a couple of years from their initial Forgotten Gods release. Maybe because of like some very dedicated communities that did some very cool leagues and stuff. Who knows? But yeah, they did go back to make another Grim Dawn expansion after all. I still wonder sometimes like why they went back to make another one. Maybe because like they had some other projects apart from Farthest Frontier that they were working on internally, and I know that at least one of them, like one of those projects is okay, like one of them is taking forever, but they're still working on it, and the other one is it basically got benched and like scrapped, right? So maybe that made them rethink and try to go for a little more safe option until Grim Dawn 2 is ready for pre-production, which will happen next year. Yeah, who knows?
Once we saw that, hey, this thing's actually selling really well, and we probably, we should keep supporting it with additional content. But I don't know. I mean, it's, all of our expansions have done very well. People seem to mostly return for them. We're at the point now where the game has just kept selling for longer than, we could have ever imagined. And, I mean, what is it, like 3 years after our last expansion where we said we're not making any more expansions for Grim Dawn. Here we are working on a new expansion. And part of the reason that we said we're never working on any more expansions is because, unfortunately, due to the way that things are set up, it is increasingly difficult, increasingly complex to add in at each new expansion. We have to like make a new version of the world, and there's all these different skill class permutations that you have to worry about balancing and creating synergies and itemization for. Really, the way that we did items is one of the biggest issues prohibiting us from adding additional character classes to the game, which otherwise like would be low-hanging fruit. Like that would be a really easy way to add content that would have a lot of replay value.
Yeah, whenever you play like one of those class mods, like the Diablo 3 class mod or like the Diablo 2 mod and so on, like I feel like the thing that like jumps into your eye the most is always the either lack of itemization for the added classes or the like the different feel of itemization for those classes. It doesn't feel as natural as the like base Grim Dawn classes. And it's also like one of the reasons why in the community leagues we've never done a new mastery yet, and rather just added more different ways to play existing items, or like existing masteries with new items rather. Because there were like still some windows we could explore with new itemization, and we went for that instead of, because it felt a bit more natural than making a new class. And also a new class would have been a tremendous amount of work that we did not have the time to put it in for the leagues. They are putting in the time now with thanks to Vastikarn, but also you need to have some skills for like new mechanics for a new class, right? It would have been also like a lot easier to make a new class via just like reshuffling already existing templates for skills, right? As like most of the like class mods do as well. But now with shapeshift, like something like shapeshifting, for example, is something you cannot do with the modding tools they provide you with. It's something you have to change the like code that you cannot access, right? So that's really only something that Create themselves can do, really. the Blood Knight and the other Tempest Mastery from the D3 mod were pretty cool. That's true. I mean, there are some pretty decent classes out there. I have to say, like the Diablo 3 mod, I think comes to mind the most for me personally. There are some pretty cool workarounds that the modding creator, like the mod creator of that mod, has done to try to make some of the skills feel a little, well, like different and unique compared to the base game class skills, even though they are still like using the same templates.
Yeah. But because of the way itemization works, we have to create like, hundreds of items to support all of the different like plus skill stuff for all of the different mastery combinations.
To be fair, Xanta has like his big spreadsheet for that, so I don't think that's like necessarily the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue, like making another DLC or like the biggest maybe like hurdle to overcome to make another DLC for Grim Dawn was at least at the time, like around like 2020 or 2021, when they decided to not do another DLC. Must have been like the modding, like the tools, like the modding tools, which are like their official tools that use themselves as well, right? Like working with those tools for another DLC is something that I can definitely imagine them not looking forward to at the time. And they definitely needed a break from that. That's what I remember devs telling us as well. Maybe not necessarily in official posts, but like behind closed doors, more or less. So yeah, I was a little surprised they did go back to make another DLC and like to start working with their ancient tools once again, because it is a bit painful.
So that kind of caused us to drag our feet in putting out expansions, along with the fact that we're just really burnt out from working on ARPGs for so long.
Yeah. And from your tools.
But yeah, I don't know. In general, I would say I think every 3 to 4 months sounds like a nightmare to me. But I think, that's probably beneficial for sales. Given the pace that I would like to work at, I feel like every 8 to 10 months or something maybe is good. But yeah, I don't know.
I haven't spent much time reading historical feedback from your community, so I'm honestly not sure what the answer to this question is going to be, but given that many of the other major action RPGs that people would have been playing were live service games that live or die based on the frequency of their updates, did any members of your community base their feedback or expectations on a different release cadence than the one you're actually doing? Like, did you get people who cropped up after 3 months and said, this is a dead game and that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I don't know, to some degree that's unavoidable. Like, we're here actively working on Farthest Frontier, trying to get it out of early access, and we'll put out a massive update, and then like literally a week later, people will pop up and be like, is this game abandonware? Is this still in development? It's like, we just put out this huge patch and new features, like a week ago. So I don't know. I think that it's just unavoidable that that's going to happen, but the majority of the audience doesn't really care. And in fact, in some ways, I think we're just really moving away from that culturally. Like, I think for, older people, there is more of this, like we grew up in a time where releases were further apart, where companies typically stopped working on games after, a few months after a release.
Game for boomers by boomers.
Here we are almost 10 years after the release of Grim Dawn, and we're now releasing a new expansion. Like that never happened, 15 or 20 years ago. And part of that was just because of the way retail worked, where things disappeared from store shelves. And it was very hard, to convince a distributor to carry, an expansion or something for a product that came out 10 years earlier.
I mean, there were like definitive editions or like gold editions like a couple of years later after some expansions, like putting in like a game with all DLCs together and like one disc and stuff like that. Like it did happen sometimes. I guess not 10 years later, but like a couple of years later. In some cases.
I think also we were like always chasing graphical improvements 15 or 20 years ago. And now we've gotten to this point where the audiences have become sort of agnostic to graphics to a degree. My kids started out playing Minecraft, which, is not exactly the the king of high fidelity graphics. And so coming from that, it's like their expectations for what graphics need to be are totally different than mine. Like they don't have this coupling of like, oh, good graphics means that it's going to be quality gameplay that I think existed for a lot of us, way back in the day. And then games just remain on the storefront forever. And especially, I think younger people they're not as time sensitive about what's trendy or not right now. Like, my kid the other day, my teenager was like, oh, Dad, how do you know who Eminem is? Like, this is some hot new artist. And I'm like, dude, he's older than I am. Like, Eminem's been around forever. That's how I know who Eminem is. But like, they don't care. They'll go back and listen to, binge some artist who was popular 20 years ago. Or like, my kids will sometimes play like these pretty old games. And I'm like, how did you find that? Like, how did you get into that? And it doesn't seem to matter as much to them whether it's like the hot new thing or not.
That is really very interesting. That actually matches with my experiences talking to kids these days as well. And, the graphics point is a great one because when we were growing up, as you say, each generation of games sort of better graphics, and that's a way you knew it was the hot new thing.
That's true.
And these days, half the successful games are ones
going from like PS1 graphics to PS2 graphics was like, holy shit, like mind blown, right? Like how this game looks so good, it has to be good, right?
So the developers have intentionally picked some style that fits what they're trying to do, as opposed to just pushing. I want to spend an extra $100 million on this game, please.
Yep.
Which some people are doing, of course, as a way of signaling it's the latest generation of Call of Duty or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for both of those approaches, but 15 years ago there was only one approach, and nowadays it's totally different. I think that there's a huge market, and that market has different people have very different sensibilities, and things just work differently.
So when you release a new expansion, which is topical because, of course, you've got one coming up soon, what do you feel from a marketing point of view actually moves the needle on awareness?
I have no idea. It's funny because when I launched Grim Dawn, I just didn't have any money for marketing, so it wasn't something I had to spend too much time thinking about. I mean, we made sort of like, grassroots efforts on social media and whatever. But ultimately, I just didn't think too much about it. We just kind of plopped the game out, and somehow it took off.
Back then, still broke now.
And, in retrospect, now I look back and I think, man, if we'd had, some significant marketing budget to put into the game, how different might things have been? How differently would it have performed? Would we, have sold a lot more copies in total, or would it just have front-loaded more of those copies, and the game would have done the same in the end anyway?
I feel like actually, it would have probably been the latter, what you just said, right? It would have probably been more front-loaded sales, and less sales over time, arguably. They could have sold like more total if they would have been able to like cash in humongously like in the first couple of months, maybe with like some crazy marketing budget. But I feel like over time, it would have not made a huge difference, to be fair, because like the engine is, all things considered, and like graphics and so on, it's not that new, and it is not a live service game so like it doesn't warrant you doing constant like big graphical updates like they did with Path of Exile 1, for example. So I don't think it, like for Grim Dawn 2 they could go big, but for Grim Dawn 1, because like Grim Dawn 2 has a new engine, and like if that engine is good and supports like insane graphics and so on, then that could be like a much more of a banger, right? And Grim Dawn 1 is a banger as well, but many people are still like annoyed. Well, not annoyed maybe, but they don't like the art, or like they don't like the older graphics and so on. And he did say that like it doesn't matter as much for like younger people nowadays, maybe, but I feel like to a certain degree it still matters whether or not like graphics look clean to a certain degree, and Grim Dawn is on one hand like super detailed, and another hand like sometimes it doesn't look all too clean.
It's very hard to tell. I mean, the big thing I would say moves the needle is getting featured on Steam. And so to my thinking, the major purpose of marketing is to front load sales that maybe would have happened eventually anyway, but to do so in such a way that, you get a big feature on Steam, and then that attracts attention that you may not have otherwise gotten. It's funny because still like 10 years after release, we occasionally have people saying like, oh, Grim Dawn, where did this come from? I never heard of it. But they're big action RPG players, which, to me, I find mind-boggling. Like, if you're a big action RPG player, at some point, wouldn't you just go online and say, what are the top action RPGs? Or, look up action RPG on Steam. And it seems inevitable that you'd find Grim Dawn, but yet somehow some people have still managed to not discover that a game exists.
Yeah.
So I do feel like there is some additional marketing we could have benefited from. And I think, that those Steam features are a very tangible impact. But other than that, I'm experimenting with things now for the Farthest Frontier release. Like, we're putting a bunch of money into an influencer campaign, but it's like, I have no idea if that's a good investment or not,
Yeah. Anecdotally, and based on my experience, I think that is helpful. Of course, having a high quality game is the most important thing, but from what I've heard, Farthest Frontier is very enjoyable, so that should go well, hopefully.
It seems so far.
When are you planning to release it?
The 23rd of October, so it's coming up.
Wait, they have I knew it's gonna be in October. I didn't know there's an actual date for this. 23rd of October. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna check out 1.0 Farthest Frontier. We are doing marketing, also nobody knew. Yeah. Oh yeah, oh shit. 23rd of October. Let's go. Yeah, I mean that's in like not even 3 weeks from now. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, definitely gonna stream that and check it out. I mean, I did really I didn't actually buy the game because I got a key by being a playtester for Farthest Frontier. And I did play it quite a bit when it first came out to early access. But I think I haven't played it in like almost 2 years. So yeah, definitely looking forward to what they have been cooking the last couple of months/years even. And also, there are like stuff like skill trees now in that game, right? Like Farthest Frontier has skill trees, which is very interesting. Like tech trees, I guess you could say, not skill trees. Tech trees, like Anno and so on. So that's kind of cool.
Quick, yep.
How about the new expansion for Titan Quest? What's your rough timeline like on that?
We're always...
Wait, did he just say your next expansion for Titan Quest?
The new expansion for Titan Quest. What's your...
What?
Coming up quick, yep.
How about the new expansion for Titan Quest? What's your rough timeline like on that?
We're always bad at estimating.
Titan Quest. What's your...
Coming up quick, yep.
How about the new expansion for Titan Quest? What's your rough timeline like on that?
We're always bad at estimating when things are going to happen until we get pretty close.
I meant Grim Dawn, not Titan Quest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
didn't realize either.
I assume that's what you meant. But I don't know. We're thinking like first half of next year.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be cool. And
what did it say? I mean,
that's exciting.
We're thinking like first half of next year.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay,
that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be cool. And it's interesting because it also, it sort of develops one of the civilization. Like as you play through Grim Dawn, you encounter the remnants or ruins of certain civilizations that existed in the world. And so this expansion is going to help really flesh out one of these civilizations that had only previously been kind of alluded to. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to segue into an RTS that we're building, game, yes. Which is still a long ways off, but it'll be set in the universe. And it will
crossover's cool there.
Yeah, it'll include like a couple of these Grim Dawn civilizations as playable races.
Yeah, like if in case any of you also didn't know, like the Kern, which are featured in the Fangs of Ossarkhan expansion, are going to be one of the playable factions in the upcoming RTS that they are working on as well, right? There's going to be like the Erudan Empire, the Kern, and the Arcovians, as far as I know. I mean, it might change. It's going to be a couple of years probably from now when they actually release, who knows? But yeah, that's the plan at least right now. Who knows? Maybe they go bankrupt in the meantime. I don't think so, but who knows, right? Farthest Frontier is not the RTS game. No, it's not. Farthest Frontier is a city builder with optional combat. The RTS game is an actual RTS, kind of in the style of like StarCraft, Age of Empires, and so on.
Nice. Do you think there's much crossover between ARPG and RTS players?
The RTS will have multiplayer. I mean, it does. It will have. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine a former Age of Empires. I don't know if you can say pro gamer, but like almost pro gamer, I guess. As in like in Medierra, not making an RTS that has multiplayer as well. I mean, as I assume it's gonna be kind of like story focused. But then again, like honestly, like many RTS games in the past also were actually more story focused than one would imagine at this point. Like Warcraft 3 campaign, and Anno had like tons of campaigns as well. Like there were like tons of campaigns in RTS games, and I feel like most of the people did enjoy like those campaigns, or like even like just games versus AI more than like actual PvP games. But I also at the same time cannot imagine Crate making an RTS game that does not have some kind of multiplayer. Like I wouldn't. I mean, I would be very surprised. I mean, it could happen, of course, but I have no idea. Farthest Frontier is not. I mean, Farthest Frontier is not an RTS, guys. So, like, what the fuck? Farthest Frontier is like a survival city builder. It's not an RTS.
It'll include like a couple of these Grim Dawn civilizations as playable races.
Nice. Do you think there's much crossover between ARPG and RTS players?
I actually do. And it's funny because one of these guys who was a big streamer in the RTS community, it was Giant Grant Games, at one point put out this stream talking about, why have RTSs kind of failed to thrive in recent years. And
MOBAs?
Sort of combating the
ARPGs.
notion that a lot of the audience had moved off to MOBAs, he did this big survey with, I don't know, like 7,500 people and asked, other than RTS, what other genres do you play? And I think action RPG was the second most popular genre.
Also, I mean, yeah, especially RTS games like Warcraft 3 that had like heroes with abilities and so on, really crossed the gap to like MOBAs and also ARPGs in a way, I would say. And also the fact that RTS players, like back when RTS games were big, they were like young and had like, they were capable of having lots of APM and like good reflexes. But as people get older, right, they rather start playing games that don't require as much APM anymore. And ARPGs, when you compare ARPGs to like MOBAs and RTS games, ARPGs are really like a retirement home, right? Like myself included, right? Like I played RTS games first, then I played MOBAs, and now I'm playing ARPGs, right? It's literally the retirement home for like former MOBA and RTS players, I feel like.
RTS?
I wonder if this is a Blizzard thing. And the reason I say that is because, like, we all got into playing Blizzard games because of its super strong RTSs back in the day. And then because there were so many good RTSs coming out of the studio, when they said, by the way, try this thing, it's an action RPG, we're like, yes, please. And then that got us addicted to those. And so there's this association where I feel of myself as an RTS player, even though it's been a couple of decades since I actually took one seriously.
I identify as an RTS player.
That could be. I don't know. I mean, I think also there are certain gameplay parallels between them, just in terms of like, I mean, they're both very efficiency oriented. I mean, at least for me, as the type of player I am, it's all about like, level progression, screen clearing, and in an ARPG, and that kind of aligns with the notion of like economic efficiency in an RTS, and just the amount of strategizing between army composition versus character build. There's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, that is an interesting comparison. These days I struggle to pay attention to more than one aspect of a game at once. Like if I'm playing an ARPG, I can focus on my character and what's happening, and trying to stay alive in hardcore is hard enough. So I'm bad at modern RTSs because I can't split my attention across all the different things. So I wanted to talk about microtransactions in games very briefly. So As a primarily single-player game with an upfront purchase price, you didn't have an in-game microtransaction store, and one could certainly argue this is a good thing for players because it means the game that they buy is a complete product, and they can earn both power and cosmetic stuff by playing the actual game itself without needing to spend any additional money. But it also means that you have to run your entire business on the unit sales of the game and its expansion, and you potentially miss out on capturing the full demand curve. I was going to ask how this has affected your business, but then I noticed that you did actually release some packs of cosmetic item skins that didn't provide gameplay advantages. And this is fascinating to me because it means you can compare both approaches. You've got the base unit sales of the game, and you've also got the cosmetic packs. How did those loyalist packs perform, and were they worth doing?
I mean, they performed pretty well, and they were definitely worth doing. I mean, the return on investment for those is actually pretty crazy. Like, I think the first one that we put out sold like over 1 million units.
That's actually crazy.
And it's, not a lot of artist time in there. I mean, it probably costs like, I don't know, $15,000 maybe to make.
Wait, Loyalist Pack 1 cost $15,000 to make? That actually sounds crazy to me. Like, that sounds actually way higher than I would expect. Like, isn't Loyalist Pack 1, like... That's not even the one with, like, the black and the silver knight, right? That's just, like, the one with the samurai hat and... Like, the ones that don't even look that great.
It's funny because, like, part of the reason that we did those... Like, initially, I think we were very hesitant to put up, like, vanity or microtransaction feeling items because we thought that, that the audience, might not like that, and that kind of wasn't our business model. But we just got like tons and tons of requests for it, and eventually we were like, all right, well, we'll try this. And we did when it was massively successful in terms of like, the profitability for what it cost to make, and players were happy with it. And then people just, wanted more of that. And I think there's a danger, like there's a balance. I think if we'd gone too far and started pumping one out every couple of months, I think that might have soured people on it.
Yeah.
Felt like too much of a cash grab. Definitely. It's like, because it's weird. It's like you have to kind of balance like this audience demand for something with an oversaturation that eventually starts to feel greedy.
Definitely.
And I think we may have erred too much on the conservative side of that, of trying, not to be greedy developers.
Maybe.
Where we probably could have put out a bunch more of those and people would have been happy. But I don't know. I mean, to some degree, it's like...
I'm not sure. I feel like what they did felt right. Maybe they could have like done one more. But I feel like that's about it. Because after the release of the Morganath dungeon, they really didn't add that much more content until recently, right? But then again, like Loyalist Pack 3 came out recently when they started like reinvesting into the game, right? But I mean, I'm sure they're gonna like do a Loyalist Pack 4 and maybe even 5 later down the road, like after Effects of Astakarn. Yeah. I mean, I agree with him that they might have been like a bit more on the conservative side, because they could have like done one more, which would have maybe soured some people, but like souring like some people, not too many, is probably something that's like still overall fine, and you're not gonna take like too much of a like reputation hit of that.
As a company, and it's funny because like I talk to other like people who are in like game biz dev, and like I have a buddy who's does biz dev, and he owned another studio that he sold a while back, and he's always like, why aren't you doing this, why aren't you doing that, you're leaving so much money on the table, how come you're not doing ports to every console? And to some degree, part of it is that like, when you are the sole owner of a company that's done pretty well and all of your needs are met, you kind of get to this position where you're like, well, what do I think it would be cool to work on? And I mean, I think I've probably left a lot of money on the table potentially.
Do you guys think that maybe like crate structure was not, or maybe I don't know how their internal like company structure really is. I don't feel like it's too hierarchic, but him being like the sole owner, right? Maybe, yeah, like maybe a more, say, like democratic approach in that regard with, you know, brought in more ideas or like made more people work on more different parts of the game itself. I think I said this like around like 5 years ago when they said like they don't want to do like any more DLCs. I just said like, well, why don't they just hire more people? Like if they are feeling burnt out themselves working on the game, why don't they just like hire more people to work on the game for them, and they can like still do their projects that they don't want to do right themselves? Because they should know that like doing another DLC or two should be totally fine, and they can like, with the money they make with that, pay the people they hire. But I guess they also didn't want to like give their baby, their Grim Dawn baby, out of their hands too much. They were, again, like a bit too conservative.
By not having like a microtransaction store, but I don't know, at the time, like that just wasn't something that I wanted to do. And you know, similarly with
they didn't want to like
porting to a lot of different consoles, like it's kind of, you know, there's some pain involved there, and there's an opportunity cost. Like if you put engineers on that, you know, as opposed to working on your next cool game idea, it slows things down. And you know, I mean, fortunately, I think we're lucky to have gotten to a point where we don't have to be quite as financially motivated, and we can just, you know, kind of pick and choose the things that we want to do.
Yeah, I appreciate your dramatic understatement of the pain associated with porting to consoles and the maintenance of those versions.
Picking up your kids from school.
Yeah, you're completely right that there are parts of game development that are really fun, and they generally involve working on the actual game itself and listening to the customers and getting them new things. And then there's the stuff that makes money, which feels incredibly boring. And if you don't need to do that, you make a lot more game, and hence people have a lot more fun if you just skip those aspects of the business.
I do think like there is like some player value to having microtransactions, in the sense that, you know, if they were done in a way that I think is proper, like in a more sort of restrained, conservative way, it rewards the developer for the amount of hours potentially that people are playing the game. And I think that that's a little bit of like a disconnect right now between developers and players, especially in the types of games that we make that are highly replayable, where you have these people who are playing thousands of hours of the game, but they've only paid, you know, $30 or whatever it is for it. Yeah. And I mean, especially where you get to the point where you're starting to offer relatively steep discounts, you know, or, you know, you have people in other countries and maybe they've only paid like, you know, they got the game on sale, they paid $5 for Grim Dawn, and then they play like 1,000 hours. And it's funny because like you'll sometimes see comments from players who are like, oh, you know, how come you didn't do this or didn't do that? Like it's going to decrease the longevity of the game, or what's supposed to keep me playing for another 1,000 hours. And it's like, well, we already got all of the money that you're going to spend on the game. And, you know, and we put out a lot of free content updates, but at some point it's like, you know, economically, financially, it doesn't make sense for us to just keep making free stuff where, you know, we're not being rewarded for it. And so I think that's where,
I mean, with that in mind, I guess they could have really like done like another 1 or 2 more loyalist packs already. Like even pre-Fangs of Asakarn. I'm sorry.
Stuff like microtransactions can be helpful because it's a way for players who are really invested in the game to basically contribute more financially to the developer, so that the developer then, you know, has a vested interest in continuing development and providing more content. And sometimes it's things that like we would like to do, but it's just, you know, you can't justify it beyond a certain point if there isn't, you know, some sort of revenue involved. I mean, because ultimately, you know, it is a business, and we do have people's livelihoods to look out for.
Yeah, I see. And if the game is still generating money because of said microtransaction packs, then it does make it more likely that you, for example, invest in another expansion later or whatever you plan to do with it.
I think one thing that they definitely could have done, and I think they are probably kind of like planning to do this with Fangs of Asakarn, because they said like they're gonna release Fangs of Asakarn, right, and then do 2 roguelike dungeons post-release at the very least, and they could always combine a release of a roguelike dungeon with a loyalist pack, right? So like they give you the free content update in the form of a dungeon, but then at the same time they also release a like loyalist pack 4 or 5, alongside a roguelike dungeon. I think that would have been a fair model to do, even like the last like 2 to 3 years, because I feel like the players, they really enjoyed roguelike dungeons quite a bit. And well, ideally, you would need a way to scale them up properly as well, which we do have in the community leagues, but they don't have in the base game. But they will have that in Fangs of Astrakarn. So yeah, it makes a lot more sense that once Fangs is out and once they have their like Ascendant mode out as well, to make more dungeons. And then like you could definitely like cash in a little bit more by every time you release a free dungeon update, you add another Royalist pack on top to kind of like balance it out by giving free content, but also at the same time allowing people that want to support the game more to support the game more. Issue with Grim Dawn 2 will be in like 10 years from now with all expansions. You're going to be like 50 when it releases, or like when it's going to be complete. Yeah, Grim Dawn 2 content complete. I don't know. I feel like we're all going to play that in like our retirement homes.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So if you were to start again today, like let's say it wasn't Grim Dawn, it was a new franchise, which model, premium with cosmetics or free to play with cosmetics, do you think would fit a company of your scale, and why?
I mean, part of it is free to play is just an unknown for us, and I think that it comes with a lot of sort of infrastructure that it needs to support it. Like, if your game, I guess I say that. And on the other hand, like people did buy, a lot of people did buy these item packs for Grim Dawn, and it's not like we have security, so there's no way to prevent people potentially from, hacking the game and,
That's the funny thing, right? Like, they have the Loyalist packs. Honestly, I shouldn't say more than he's already saying.
Pirating stuff and giving themselves these items for free. But, so I think most people, are just want to do that to support the company to some degree. And I think when it's like a Loyalist pack DLC that comes out infrequently, I think that there's more goodwill to do that. Whereas I do think you probably do need more security, as I'm thinking through this, if you have built-in microtransactions, because I think that those purchases are less motivated by goodwill because people feel like it's this intentional part of the game. And
if you actually base your actual model around what they are currently doing as Loyalist packs, then like with the level of security they have right now, they would be absolutely fucked, right? Like it would not be sustainable in any way or form.
So there's that aspect of it. But I mean, in general, I don't know. I guess I like the premium model. You pay some amount for the game, you get a whole bunch of content. We don't have to like be making decisions purely based on like player retention. Like how can we keep players playing the game longer? We can just focus more on like just making the game fun to play. But I do think like having potentially some degree of like cosmetic microtransactions could be beneficial. Especially these things I think can be difficult like within RTS, where I think that audience is much more divided in terms of like how they're playing the game. Like people who are playing the campaign are playing in a very different way than people who are playing like PvP ladder. Mm-hmm. Or playing some kind of like online co-op. And I think that for like StarCraft 2, the skins that they put out, or like the co-op commanders that they sold to people, were a great way to allow them to have revenue off of supporting these other models of gameplay that were important to smaller portions of the audience.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas without that, it's like then you have to think about, well, how much time can we, resources can we really justify to providing, these different gameplay modes when it's not what the core audience is, what 70% of the audience is engaging with.
I see what you mean. I was thinking that another concept here is that if someone was to make a game with a secure online economy, and you have to make the decision between free to play and premium, something that's not really discussed is a secure online game obviously lives or dies based on the sanctity of the economy. If everyone's cheating and botting and stuff, then what's the point of playing? And so looking at botting in particular, if a game is free, and I say this having spent a decade fighting bots in a free game, If a game is free and you ban the bots, they come back seconds later, and the marginal cost per account is whatever it takes to register a new Gmail account and get a new clean VPN IP address. And therefore, you ban 10,000 bots, 10,000 bots come back 5 minutes later, and it's a fight. Whereas if the game has an upfront premium cost, it certainly means that it's only worth it for them to bot the game if the amount of revenue that they can get by doing that activity exceeds the cost of the game they're paying. And if the game is a substantial cost, there's no way they're making $30 of value out of it before you ban them if you've got mature tools. Right. And so this is something that I imagine the Path of Exile 2 team is finding at the moment, comparing to Path of Exile 1, because currently PoE 2 is in early access where you have to buy a supporter pack to get entry. And so I would expect that the botting behavior were different between the two games, though I don't know that.
I think it was also similar in Counter-Strike, right? You had to always buy new Counter-Strike keys. But to be fair, Counter-Strike keys were super cheap at some point, right? Or it was so easy to get them that it didn't really help too much. But yeah, for PoE 2, I guess it's a fair argument.
I mean, I think the other thing, based on what you're mentioning, is that, even if people who are botting are then buying additional versions of the game, it's in a way, they're contributing resources to you to continue policing the game and removing bots. Whereas, if the game is completely free to play, it's at some point resources gets further on in its lifespan, it's you're investing resources and trying to combat something that is just purely extracting time and energy from the game.
Yeah. You always hear these conspiracy theories about how people accuse the developers of games of banning bots at a certain cadence, leaving the bots there just so they can make enough money and then banning them so that you get the money when they have to rebuy the copy of the game, which is obviously not something that happened in Path of Exile because the game was free. But I don't imagine it working like that because the negative effects of having the bots are obviously catastrophic for these games. And once the economics are not there for the botters anymore because they're being banned, they will just move on to something else.
I think that the biggest reason that companies do that is because they don't want people to be able to understand how they detected the bots. I mean, at least I don't know how well this translates to banning bots, but
yeah, true. That's true. Actually, we had the same discussion in our team regarding the community seasons. We were also discussing when to ban cheaters and so on. Do we ban them right away once we know, or do we try to ban them in waves? So the people don't know exactly what triggered us to know that they cheated or not. And I think we also agreed on rather doing waves, because then that way it's a bit harder for the cheaters to understand how we detected them cheating.
With hackers, it's a big concern is if you're immediately banned after doing something specific, then you can figure out how the company determined that you were hacking. Whereas if you just compile a list of hackers and then, ban them all a month later, nobody really knows what, allowed for their detection.
Yeah, you can do things like ban 90% of them because that will just confuse them, right? What did these accounts do? What's special about them? Why are they still working? There's a lot of fun stuff you can do to mess with people. And honestly, in a thing where it's a matter of making it too annoying for someone to keep doing, messing with them is the best way of achieving that.
It's funny that the whole cat and mouse game that is involved with that.
Yeah, it's a cool area. I enjoy that quite a lot, and it's an advantage of doing online game stuff is that you get to fight a lot of different types of abuse. Obviously there's all the bad financial abuse where people are trying to do.
He enjoys fighting abuse. I mean, that seems like a hero thing to do in a way. But
bad things with your payment processing, and that's quite sad to have to deal with. But the game level stuff is interesting, seeing the cool things people come up with and then trying to find a good solution to that. So since you last released your 2019 Grim Dawn expansion, you've been building Farthest Frontier, which we've mentioned a few times in this conversation. How's that going, and what have you learned about it that can be applied back to action RPGs?
It's going great so far. It's funny because when I just had always wanted to make a town builder. I loved playing town builders when I was in college, and I was sad that it felt like for a while the market had kind of dried up for those. Of course, as happened to me when I started working on Grim Dawn, all of these ARPGs appeared suddenly. Now the same thing I feel like is happening with the town builder genre, where there's 1 million town builders coming out. And then, we started working on the RTS a little while ago. Now all of a sudden there's all of these RTS games coming out after none for 10 years.
Yep.
But in general, I don't know. I initially was wondering, is there an audience for this genre? And as it turns out, yes, there definitely still is a significant audience for the town builder genre. And Farthest Frontier has done great for us so far in early access. I think we're up to 1.2 million copies, and we've got 1.6 million wish lists. So, during early access. So, I mean, by those standards, it's totally outperforming where Grim Dawn was at that point in its
really good numbers.
How will that translate to long-term sales? I don't know, but so far I'm pretty optimistic. And then, I don't know, as far as how does that translate to ARPGs, I don't know.
Well, it's nice you got to work on something different for a while, because you mentioned burnout and stuff, and I totally know what you mean. It's after focusing on one genre for a long time, it's nice to think about something else for a little while.
Yeah, so we have a couple of other projects, like I mentioned, the RTS, that are in development that will sort of be the next phase of games after this town builder. But I feel like we've gotten to the point. I've gotten to the point, and
I feel like Grava, right? You guys know Grava Thule? In game, right, as a nemesis, but maybe you also know the guy. He was streaming every now and then as well on the Crate channel, like an employee for Crate. And I know he's been working on a horror game for, I feel like, 10 years now. And at some point I feel like they just let him exist in the company, do his own thing. And the rest of the company is just financing his dream of doing a horror game. But he's getting nowhere.
Sort of right-hand man, Zantai is his online handle, as he's known by most people. I think has finally gotten to the point where we're like, all right, maybe it's time. It's time to start thinking about Grim Dawn too.
Interesting. Is there anything you can say about that today?
I don't want to, jump the gun, get people too excited, because it's a long ways off. But we have been developing our own new proprietary engine for the RTS, and that will be the same engine that we use for the ARPG. So I think that's cool. The fact that the RTS will give us a chance to kind of hammer on this engine and refine it, and then we'll build off a separate version for the ARPG, adapt it for that. But when I was working on Grim Dawn initially, we were really kind of hamstrung with the old technology that we started with, which already had begun to sort of, I think, show its age by the time that we were working on Grim Dawn. And now we're kind of locked into it. Once you have this existing audience that owns the game, you can only change things so much.
Yep.
That and we can't go to a new shader model or anything, or we'd have to redo all of the art in the game. So it's very exciting to be able to, start on this new action RPG with a completely fresh engine, where I think we can really upgrade, the whole look of the game. And then, as a team, we've just matured over the time that, we worked on Grim Dawn, and then, subsequently, we've hired a bunch of really top-notch artists in recent years. So I think we're going to be able to do something, that graphically is a lot more impressive than Grim Dawn. But additionally, it's also once you're have released the game, you're kind of locked into the systems that you have. So there are a lot of systems that, I think we'd like to revisit and do in a little bit different way. One of the things I mentioned already was just the fact that the way our class masteries interact with our itemization makes it very prohibitive to keep adding different class options to the game. So I think we've come up with a pretty cool new way to do that will allow us to more freely add in additional classes as with expansions. And I don't know, anyway, I'm pretty excited about it. But
that is exciting.
It is, well, we've determined that that's, what we're going to work on after this next phase of games. Like, we haven't started working on it yet. So, we're at least like, I would say 6 years out.
Yeah, I see. This is me speculating, but if your engine starts off for an RTS, it means you'll have solid netcode by necessity for lots of units, and that's always a good thing when you're planning an action RPG.
Yes.
Yeah, which could mean just really good offline, offline multiplayer rather than online, of course, but...
Yeah. We have thought about, potentially having some secure multiplayer with Grim Dawn too. I mean, I don't think we would, necessarily try to make it as big of a thing as, it is in like, Path of Exile or Diablo. But I think having that as an option for players to do, would be interesting, because there is a certain portion of the community. I mean, just the fact that somebody made a mod to do leagues in Grim Dawn speaks to the fact that there are people who would like to do like PvP or like do seasonal runs through the game, and I think it'd be cool to be able to support that. And obviously, that's having secure online play is something that we're going to have to do for the RTS.
I think that with secure online play, the size of the player community is not necessarily an always bigger is better situation. I've observed in Path of Exile that smaller player communities and like private leagues have significantly more interesting trade behavior and economic stuff going on than when you dump the entire world in one big economy and everything gets hyper efficient. And so the smaller groups of players playing together do have advantages. And so, supporting both offline and online means the only people playing online are the ones who really want to be. And, I see that as a potentially positive thing rather than forcing people who, would rather play offline having to be online.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting area for sure. So what have you been playing recently yourself other than, the games you're working on?
Not a lot, not as much as I'd like to. I periodically play Helldivers with my kids. That's been a lot of fun. I mean, it's a blast because you just go in, shoot some bugs or robots up, and could feel like you had a good time in 30 or 45 minutes. I still play a lot of StarCraft 2. I don't know. I just it's funny because I got into that really late in the life cycle of the game. I was just so busy working on Grim Dawn. I feel like I missed like an era of gaming early on. So I didn't start playing StarCraft 2 until after Legacy of the Void came out. But I mean, I've easily, put in like thousands of hours.
Legacy of the Void is like when I stopped playing StarCraft 2. I played Wings of Liberty and whatever the Kerrigan expansion it was even called, Heart of the Swarm, right? Is he playing Protoss? Am I getting wrecked by Protoss? Monka.
StarCraft 2.
Once again. PTSD.
So yeah, I do that, every once in a while. And then, I don't know what else have I played. I played, God, what was it called? I can't remember. There was some survival. I've played a couple survival games recently. But I don't know, the name eludes me currently.
Right. By survival, do you mean like Rust/Ark style survival, or do you mean like Vampire Survivors style survival?
More like, well, so I mean, I played a bunch of Valheim like a couple of years ago, and then there was another game that came out more recently. I cannot remember the name of it, but it's it was sort of similar to a Valheim style survival game.
Palworld.
No, not that one.
Yeah, which I honestly enjoyed myself. So that was an interesting experience. You're looking up which game it was.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's in my Steam library here. Can I see what I played recently? I played some finals. Let's see. I don't know. Oh, Enshrouded. That's what it was.
Right. Yeah. Which came out at a similar time to Palworld. Yeah.
Yeah.
Haven't played it, but it has been recommended to me.
It's an interesting game. Like, I mean, just the fact that you can dig through the world, I think, was very cool.
Yeah, that is cool. I was looking at the action RPG being made by Moonbeast, some of the ex Diablo 2 developers, And
they have, like,
that game appears to have terrain deformation as well, and gives me the impression that I could dig through the world, which is pretty cool, and a very different take on you know, traditional action RPGs.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with. Yeah, well, it's been an honor interviewing you today. I had a great time. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for joining me. Yeah, and best of luck with both the impending release of Farthest Frontier and the you know, the final push on getting the Grim Dawn expansion ready, and then the exciting RTS and other projects. It sounds like it's going to be a good few years.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I am pretty excited about the release, and you know, it's too bad we didn't get to talk about what you're working on, but
it'll be a while before I want to share that. There's stealth mode for the time being, on purpose.
All right.
Well, thanks very much, Arthur. And
thank you.
If you viewers enjoyed this interview, then please like and subscribe. I hope to have many more in the future. And thanks. I'll see you next time.
All right, it was pretty cool, not gonna lie. Very nice video. If you want to watch it yourselves as well, and you haven't watched it yet, here you go. All right, I'll post it in the chat as well. Yeah, honestly, like, most of his videos are top tier. Very, very, very nice. What do you think, guys? What do you think about the interview with Arthur Bruno? Abonnieren? Yeah, true. Like and subscribe, guys. Let's do it right here. Let's do it live.